Chapter 3, Draw Commands, Basic AutoCAD CAD 116. In this chapter, we're going to learn about different formats and types of coordinates, drawing lines and circles using mouse input, and drawing aids such as snap and grid, being able to draw lines and circles using dynamic input, being able to draw lines and circles using command line input, and using polar tracking. All right, so as we take a look at this chapter, those are our learning objectives. And as we look at AutoCAD objects, being able to draw things like arcs and circles, polygons, rectangles, and ellipses, polylines, and splines, we would find these types of things in AutoCAD. And what we could do to start off is we could say File, New. And if we use the AutoCAD template, that's the default. As we go on more with work in the course, we'll start using the templates for the mechanical and the architectural print. But for this example, I'm going to use the AutoCAD template that comes with AutoCAD. And so when you start a new drawing and you say File, New, your drawing software will default to the template folder, and you can then choose the AutoCAD template, which is a basic 2D template. Now you may notice that my screen is white with grids on it. I'm going to turn off this toolbar, and I like to make my background color white, and so under the Options command, under Display and Colors, for 2D model space, I'll set that color for white. By default, when you install it, it's black and looks like this. And then to change it back, we'll go to the Display tab, Colors, 2D Model Space, white. And you can choose any color you like. It doesn't show on the prints. And we'll say OK. I have the grid on right now. I can turn the grid on and off down here. And the snap. The snap will snap to the grid when I'm in a draw command, like the line command. You'll see that it's snapping to the corners of the grid squares. I'll turn those off. And then if you're not seeing those at the bottom of the AutoCAD screen, you can click on these triple bars here and just turn them on. And so if you don't have grid and snap on, here's your grid and your snap, then you won't see all these icons down here at the bottom. And you don't really need them all, but for our purposes, we'll just leave them alone. And this is our command line right here. So if we're looking at AutoCAD objects, things like lines, points, arcs, and circles, they would be in the draw area here of the ribbon. And I can pin this, and I can say draw a line, and then I can left mouse click, and then I can click again with the mouse. And I can hit escape, and that's a line on layer 0. If I wanted to draw a circle, I could draw a circle. If I wanted to draw a polygon and a rectangle, polygon is located under the rectangle command, and it's going to ask you how many sides. Notice also that the command is reflected down here in the command line input. And when it follows the cursor like it's doing right now, that's what's called dynamic input. And so if I say I want a 5-sided polygon, then I can go over here and I can choose a polygon and draw that polygon. It's either inscribed or circumscribed. And so if I right click and repeat that, and then if I say I want a 5-sided polygon, and I have what's called OSNAP, OSNAP will gravitate to whatever's checked off. So if center is checked off on OSNAP when I'm drawing with it, and I want to draw with that a polygon, I can go to Polygon, enter the number of sides, gravitate to the center, and what I have to do is I actually have to touch the geometry. And then if I say circumscribed, I can then draw a circle about the outside of the edge of it, like that. Other draw commands, rectangle, ellipse. Again, they're straight draw commands, and so some of the commands are underneath these other commands. Here's a rectangle, and then an ellipse. And we'll do some more work with those as we get farther along in the course. Polylines and splines are basically link lines that are treated as one. And so if I work with a polyline, and then I hit escape, it's treated as one line geometry. And these are grips, and you can move them around dynamically. It's called grip mode. If you hover over a grip, it'll give you the size. It'll also allow you to, if you click on a grip, go into what's called grip mode. And then if I hit the space bar, I can go through and I can move it, rotate it, scale it, make it bigger, smaller, mirror it, about a mirror line, stretch it, again, make it bigger or smaller, move it. I'm just going to hit escape and escape again to clear out the grips. Locating the draw commands, you can either use the keyboard, the menu bar, or you can use an icon or a button. And so I was demonstrating using the menu bar. If we were to type in the command line here, the line command, as you start to type, the commands will pop up that begin with the letter that you start with. So if I say LI, it's going to give me all the commands that begin with LI, and I can say line. That would be considered command input. For the most part, we'll be using the ribbon. It's more graphical. You can just choose the command off the ribbon, and then there's the different ways to draw circles. You can draw it with the center and a radius, center and a diameter, 2-point, 3-point. So as we take a look at our drawings, let's use a different color. I'm just going to change the properties to blue. And then I'm going to erase these. You can erase things by selecting them and then selecting. And if you right to left select, you'll get a blue window that only chooses what's in the box, like just that geometry right there. And if you left to right select, it selects everything it touches. And then as we go through and we start working with AutoCAD, we can do other things like be able to draw these different shapes and different features. If we wanted to draw a point, we could say point. And they're very small. These are tiny little dots that you'll see there. And we can change the point settings under utilities, point styles, to make them a little bit easier to see. As you can see here, now when I draw points, I have a different point style. Alrighty. So these are the different options for drawing circles. If I wanted to draw different circles, I can come over here and I can select circle center radius, and I can either choose with the mouse, or I could say 1 for a 1-inch radius, and that then will give me a 1-inch radius. If I were to come over here and draw a circle with center diameter, and click here, and I can type 1, and now that's a diameter of 1, and the radius would be 0.5, or half of the diameter. You can also use the pull-down menu, and I really like to enable this when I work with the AutoCAD system. So what we can do to enable is this button right here. I'm going to hide the menu bar, and I'm going to show the menu bar. With the menu bar shown, I can then get the drawings this way as well. So there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. 3-point circle, 1, 2, 3. Coordinate entry is where you type it in. And so it works on an X, Y, Z coordinate system. And the first value we type in is the X coordinate. The second value is the Y coordinate. And you don't have to type in a third coordinate, but if you did, that would be the z height coordinate. Polar format is this, and this would be the length of the line and the angle of the line. So for example, if I wanted to draw a line at 3,7, at a starting point of 3,7, what I would do is I would come back here to my CAD system. Let's erase this. Put on a grid and a snap, and then here's our user coordinate system. This would be 0. Okay, so if I hover over the cursor and then I look at the values, it's almost at 0, but I'm not snapping to it because I don't have a command. If I have a command there, now it should be 0, but it's not. There it is, 0, 0, 0, and it's down here at the bottom. And so if we were to type in 3,7, I'd say line, and then the first point 3,7, enter, and then that would be 3 units over to the right and 7 units. I'm just gonna, if I wanted to get my grid so that it's in a format, what I would do is I'd say Tools, Drafting Settings, and let's just make our grid snap 1 and our snap 1, and okay that. And so then we would be able to locate that point at that location. And then if we're using polar, what that would be a line that would be 6 units at a 45-degree angle. And there's a lot of easier ways to do this. And so we start off with the hard stuff. We'll say line, and then we'll give it a point, and then we'll say at 3, less than symbol 45. And what that will do is draw a line 3 units long at a 45-degree angle. And so if I was to go and click on this unit would be 3 inches long, and then it's at a 45-degree angle. You can kind of see it. It's kind of covered up by the, there we go. So you have these different types of coordinate systems. We will use absolute coordinates in polar occasionally, but for the most of the time we'll use the polar setting within our drafting settings. We talk a little bit about mouse input. As we work with mouse input, you're just clicking the mouse where you want to draw those lines. With dynamic input on, it will allow you to put the input wherever the mouse is. And this, most students are so used to as they see it that they just take it for granted. And so with dynamic input, when we work with a line, and I say line, this is dynamic input. The cursor is following where the input is, or the input is following where the cursor is. It says first point right there. And then while I'm using dynamic input, you'll also notice that I'm going to hit escape, do that again, dynamic input. If you hit the down arrow, you'll get the options, and there's no options for this other than that one. But if I was in the circle command, and then I wanted to use some of the options while I'm in dynamic input, I can hit the down arrow key, and I get 3-point or 2-point, and I'll also get those options down here in the command line. So here's a line 5 units long at an angle of 53 degrees, and what they did was they just said line, give it a start point, you say at 5, and then the angle, I think it was probably 55 or something like that, 55, enter. And then that line will be at that vector, 53, I think you know what I mean. So there's different input methods. The best one is to use polar, relative polar, or have the actual polar button on. That's this button right here. And so you can go ahead and just draw these lines to practice with it. And then they create these tables to tell you how to draw these lines in one of the most difficult ways possible, to read how to draw. And so it says command, select line, pick location 1, 1, pick location 3, 1, and enter. And so this is very old school. And so if I was looking at this and I delete it, and then I were to put this, and I'd say line 1, 1, so we'd say line 1, 1, enter. And then the next coordinate would be, I believe it was 3, 1, would be 3, 1, enter. And then you can input coordinates in that way. It's good for manufacturing, for computer numerical control programming. But when we draw, what we'll typically do is we'll typically use an input method with what's called polar input. And so as we go through, they just walk through different ways to create these circles with command line input, meaning they type everything in, versus if we go through and we have our dynamic input on, and then we set our polar tracking on, then it works really efficiently. And it's kind of a modern tool. And so as we go and we take a look at this, I'm going to turn off my grid. It's a little easier to see, and I'll delete that. And then if I have the polar button enabled, and this is polar right here, and it turns blue when it's on, and I like to set it at 15 degrees because it's kind of like an old school drafting board. You can also set those commands under the tools drafting settings. So you can have your snap and your grid on. If I turn my grid back on, you'll see it. Polar tracking enabled at 15 degrees. And then OSnap, depending on what drawings we're doing, we're going to either leave them on or off. And I'll say OK. And I'm going to turn that grid back off. Then when I go and I draw, what I do is I click and I just point it in the right direction. And then I get these tracking lines. They're green. And so every 15 degrees, I'll get a tracking line. So there's 30. And it can be a little wonky when the snap is on, so if I turn it off, it's a little more fluid. 45, 60, 90, 120, and if I go out here to 180. And so with polar tracking, you just point it in the direction. So if I want a line 5 inches long at a 45-degree angle, I track out to the 45, and then I can say 5, enter. And that's a great tool. That's the way it should work. You don't have to think too much about it, and it draws the line that length and at that angle. So you want to use polar tracking. It goes into some really fine details as far as it talks a lot about it. But from a general standpoint, we'll typically leave polar tracking on, and I'll typically tell you guys to set it up at 15 degrees. This one's set at 30, but you can see track line, and then you just track it and then tell it how long you want that line to be. It talks a little bit about polar snap. I really don't use this item, so I'm not going to go into it. And then drawing lines using polar tracking and snap. And so if we were to look at this, and let's see if I can make this smaller. So for example, if I wanted to draw this shape, I'm going to just erase this one real quick. And I have my polar enabled, which is right here. I could say line, start the line here. Actually, they started at 2, 2, so I'd say line, starting point, 2, 2, enter. And then I would track it this way. Type in 2, enter. Zoom in by turning the wheel on the mouse, track up, 2, enter. And this is a 45-degree angle, and so I track it to 45 degrees, and then I would type in 1.4142, enter. There it goes. Track it up this direction too. Oops. If I make a mistake, I can hit the undo key. It took all of it away. I'm going to redo it. I only want this line gone. I'm going to hit the delete key on that. And then I'm going to say line from that endpoint. I'm going to track this way. 2, enter. Go vertical. 2, 4, 1.4142, and then back to the point of origin, or 4 inches. And then you can double click the middle mouse wheel to zoom in on it. And so that's an example of polar tracking. And they do some other examples with polar tracking as well. They draw some of these other figures. Again, we really don't use the polar tracking snap settings, so you can just kind of breeze over that. And then it's just got some chapter exercises. We're not going to require that students complete the chapter exercises. We're just going to do the exercises that we see in Module 2. And so our work for Module 2 will basically be these exercises, like this architectural drawing, or the other exercise, which is our mechanical. And you don't have to do both of them. If you do both of them, we'll give you bonus points. All right, that completes my lecture on Chapter 3, working with these different draw commands.